Harold Hestnes, and I bring you to the year 1968 when we first met the Skinners in our town of Weston, Massachusetts, where we enjoyed community life together. We're still there. Wickham and Alice abandoned us for Maine, but another story there. And between 69 and 71, I can't give it an exact date, Wickham suggested I speak to Alice about her Radcliffe responsibilities. Well, that was a rather interesting issue. She was vice chair of the committee bearing the name Think. Now, that's pretty good for a ratty. Some of us at Harvard wondered about whether Radcliffe, thought very much, but, I was learning something anew. And I also learned that Alice Skinner, that delightful person who never bred controversy, was made of steel. And she had to be, because she took on the Harvard establishment. And the question was, Radcliffe, was it going to exist in any corporate form, or were the assets all going to be grabbed by Harvard? Now, the Harvard Corporation had been dealing with this issue, and in 71, Nate Pusey's period as president was ending. He knew that before it was announced, obviously. And he'd like to clean up the balance sheet a little bit. And that meant taking over Radcliffe's assets. There's a nice quad down there, some buildings and some very nice endowments and things like that. And besides, we've been educating Radcliffe, and they have their housing and they have a few little frills, but basically they're totally dependent on us. Why not merge? The argument for merger and acquisition of the asset base of Radcliffe was rather clear. So I said, now, Alice, there's one thing you've got to understand. You're part of a cover-up for a deal already cut. I have every reason to believe that the Harvard Corporation has already decided on the future of Radcliffe. And Helen Gilbert, wife of a member of the corporation by the name of Carl Gilbert, who was also the chairman of the Gillette Corporation. My guess is the meetings had occurred at the Somerset Tavern or Union Club, and you're undoing a deal that has so far been everything but cast and cement. She went about her task. And this was, really guerrilla warfare. And I'll give you the result. She won. They modified their position to allow the corporate soul of Radcliffe to remain, that it had some continued responsibilities for educating women on its own. The Radcliffe Institute, I can't remember the pieces and parts, but it went from landscaping to business. And I must say, in looking at the record, and there's a fascinating archive at Harvard now in the library that documents some of this, Alice Skinner was the one that tipped the scale back, and the Radcliffe of today is largely due to her efforts. There is a tough lady. Another thing that happened during that discourse was trying to understand her nomenclature. Special person came into a definitional mode. And the first special person she identified I thought was a total fruitcake. So I was telling Betsy, I guess we're going to listen to Alice, because when special person comes out, there's a little nutsiness, and you've got to be careful. Well, that wasn't it at all. Her special person was simply the designation that this person has something special to offer that you can leverage into something else or deal with in a pleasurable way. But also a leverage point. It defined character. And after the Harvard episode, she thought I ought to work with her a little more. And this one I've got to be very gingerly on, because it involved the Swedenborgian Church, which at that time in Harvard Square had just passed its 50th year of controversy as to who owned the chapel and what we were going to do with the future, and Harvard was looking over the wall to acquire it and whatnot. It had been to every court in the Commonwealth, including the Supreme Judicial Court, as to who owned the property and what the lease rights were. And I said, Alice, this is 60 years of almost, open rebellion. And she said, yes, but if you listen, and of course that theme comes out constantly, just listen. Maybe there's a way of getting these people together to mediate. Well, after about 3 years of struggle, And maybe my bills assisted in this because they got to be rather large, and maybe there was an attrition that sort of followed the billable time I was putting into it. I'd like to think it helped because I'm not sure that my contribution was significant, but 60 years of warfare that almost resembled the Mideast came to some kind of a conclusion, and I hope it's still there. And I don't want to inquire as to whether it is or not. But again, it was a learning exercise. The final thing I learned from Alice was her love for her garden plots, and that started at Spruce Head. And it was a real problem for me because she said, with glowing terms, I want you to taste this dish. We're going to have it. I said, fine. I didn't like it at all. And she said, what's the matter? I said, I just don't like it. Oh. And I fed it to the dog under the table, which is not the right thing to do, but I did that. And she said, well, there are many recipes. So second and third came. It got to the point where the dog didn't want to sit near me anymore. And, I said, Alice, I just don't like kohlrabi, and I know you got a lot of it out there, so can we kind of get together that it doesn't come to my plate? And she said, you don't understand the value of this, and then I got the lecture of the nutritional value and everything, fine. So then I was looking for McDonald's or any place to skip off to, but it didn't exist here. It was a long ride from Spruce Head for menu relief for me. But anyway, the final event showed her resolution. She sort of implied that she had changed the menu. And she said, now, you like potatoes? And I went, oh, I love potatoes. Oh, scalloped potatoes. And Wiki came up with something from Bill Atwood's nest over there, so it was lobsters, and it was very nice. And she said, well, how'd you like the potatoes? And I said, gee, they were good. Kohlrabi.